Luke here for Following Strength. We are joined today by Strength Forge, the coach and mastermind of Paddy Haynes, Jon Mallon. How are you, pal?
I'm all good, mate. I'm all good. Thank you. I've just finished training. That's why I'm covered in chalk. So I'll try and be a little bit more presentable next time. But
Hey, good heavy session?
yeah, it was good. It was good. It's just I've you might have seen on my Instagram. I one motion a lot of things, so I tend to use that as my dopamine hit of going a little bit off plan. And I've just done a few sandbags, and that's pretty much it. So
Yeah, man, I saw you
yeah.
smoke £1,000 yoke the other day.
Yeah, that was. I always say it's easier to do yoke when you're 5 foot nothing, and I've size like 11 feet. I've got massive hobbit feet, so the stability of it's a little bit easier for me. But it's one of my favorite events. So
Oh, man, you only had a
yeah,
soft belt on as well, I think.
yeah, soft belt. I had to put knee sleeves on because my knees were a bit dicky. But I normally it's one of my coaching like philosophies is to try and stay away from kit as much as I can. So um, yeah, it's a little bit of a brag. But although a funny story with that is I did a 340 beltless deadlift a while ago and then put a belt on and only pull 342. So sometimes it doesn't actually, you don't get as much out of it as you think. So it's a bit of a flex, but it doesn't always pay off.
I like that, man. Like, yeah, don't wear all the safety kit unless you
Mm,
need it.
mm.
I'm thinking back to myself, like, I always press in wrist wraps.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
never don't. And I guess my wrists probably aren't as
yeah,
strong and stable as they could be.
yeah. I mean, sometimes we could talk about that for the whole podcast, but sometimes it's like anything, it's to do with context and application, right? So, in certain scenarios, if your focus is skill acquisition within a movement, then for example, using a belt for belt cleaning an axle, then absolutely, like you should be using it, and there's kind of no two ways about it. If, however, it's a compensation, so for example, when you talk about like your wrist position, if that means that you're overly reliant on wrist flexion because your front rack is slightly off, then yeah, you might benefit from having a bit of time away. So, a shameless plug, but that's what a coach is for. It's to help you make that decision. Do you know what I mean? Not for me personally. I mean, just the coaching
Oh,
industry.
of
So
course.
it's
Well,
all
I
about
think
context.
a good coach is worth their weight in gold.
Yeah.
And Paddy Haynes raves about you, pal. Says that you
Oh,
are kind
it's
of
too
the
kind.
mastermind to the chaos.
Mm.
Catch us up. How did you get into coaching? Did you stumble into it, or was it intentional?
Yeah. So, kind of make a short story long. I actually started like way back when. Um, in more of a scientific background. So I was interested in like biology and chemistry and all that type of stuff. And like most coaches in anything to do with fitness, I'm casting a wide net here, but they tend to start from like a fitness oriented background and then they learn as they go. For me, it was very much like locking myself in the lab at university break and all that type of stuff and just reading research over and over again. I got into boxing. Um, I'm not a good team sport athlete, just to clarify. So I got into boxing, tore my ACL, and then the physio at the time while I was studying and doing my masters said, "Oh, you should get into powerlifting because you need to create a bit of structural balance." And that was kind of my first nod to that world. And like I said, I'd come from the way I tend to phrase it is you have like three pillars of evidence, right? So you have empirical, which is like the research backing what's measured gets managed, that kind of thing. You have the theoretical, which is like the basis for understanding every mechanism within the body. And then you have your anecdotal, which is application and context. I was very much in these first two wheelhouses. I didn't have a massive amount of application. So when I went into my own kind of rehab structure, um, obviously was fixing that, didn't really have the time or the capacity to train. So I thought, oh well, I'll try coaching. Turns out I enjoyed coaching more than I did actually training myself. And then powerlifting that lasted about 6 months before I got bored. Um, and then tried a strongman competition, and then fast forward like 6 years and we're here. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster, mate, to be honest with you, but it's been a
Oh,
fun one. Put it that way.
fun one for sure. I'm
Mm.
not surprised you got bored of powerlifting.
Yes, yeah.
Those straight
Hats off
lines.
to them. Yeah, hats off to them. I tell you what. You tend to see like what you call like social selection, which is a certain athlete or personality type gravitating towards a certain sport. Like I've just said that about team sport athletes for powerlifting. Credit to them because there's a gent. Literally, I've just trained with him now, and I don't know how he does it, but he does the majority of his cycle at like 60% of his max. He just does squat, bench, deadlift 4 days a week, no assistance work, and I don't know how he does it, but he's very strong. He's he's squatted 300 plus, he's benched 200 plus, but yeah, I've driven myself up the wall definitely.
Fair, man. We used to have a
Yeah.
guy at my gym. I can't remember his last name, and I feel bad now. Lovely kid. He's called Edward.
Mm-hmm.
Ridiculously strong, and he was a bit like that. He'd come in,
Yeah.
nail, 3 sets of squats, some
Yeah.
pull-ups. He'd grab his bag and go home,
Yeah.
and then he'd be
I mean, fair
benching
play.
200 kilos, and
Yeah.
yeah, freaks,
It's just that
freaks.
ultra specific training, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
yeah. And Dave Richardson was the same when he trained at my gym. He would
yeah.
genuinely come in at 8:30 at night after
Hmm.
a long day of work.
Yeah.
He would pull 400 kilos after
As
being
you do.
after being in the building for about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do some back offs, maybe do some rows, and then
Yeah.
see you later.
Yeah. Fair. Fair. I mean, if you could do such a small amount, not discrediting them, but if you could do such a small amount and get that strong, then are we the stupid ones for doing 3 hour long sessions? Who knows? I don't
Yeah,
know.
like what we calling it, kind of minimal viable dosage,
Yeah,
almost.
minimal effective dose and maximal recoverable volume. They're like two wheelhouses in the training sphere, and it is literally just because they're very much the same concept, right? It's just what is the most optimal dose. But again, if you look at it from personality types, the people that tend to veer more towards the maximum recoverable volume are a bit more dopamine driven, potentially a bit more like obsessive, and then minimum effective dose a little bit more conservative, that kind of thing. So, but it's all the same thing, and it's just trying to find what works at the end of the day. So
Yeah, find the magic pill for them.
exactly,
And
exactly.
yeah, this might turn viewers off. I'm
Mm-hmm.
an ACL recovery survivor as well,
Oh,
reconstruction survivor as
ACL
well.
survivor.
Yeah, how was your
Fellow.
rehab process? Was it kind of smooth? Are you fully
It
healthy
was
now?
not smooth. It was not smooth. This, to be fair, my ACL was a good 8, 10 years ago now. I had a patella tendon graft. Um,
Ah,
so my stability was fine straight out of the gate. I don't know if you did. You have a gracilis,
I had hamstring.
hamstring gracilis? Yeah, yeah. So obviously, for the really interesting point for the viewers, obviously the gracilis and hamstring graft, there's less anterior knee pain, usually an increased capacity for like knee extension post-op, but the stability is usually reduced. So you have to kind of work on that. Whereas a patella tendon graft's the exact reverse. So your ability to achieve full extension is really limited. But the stability was fine. So at the time, it's one of the reasons why I'm so obsessive with longevity, pain management, doing assessments with athletes now. That's like a service I offer outside of my normal coaching. Is I work with a lot of other coaches, athletes, and not necessarily physio directly, but kind of bridging the gap between purely corrective work and kind of the top end performance. But yeah, no, I had about 18 months of chronic like just knee pain, couldn't load it properly, loads of compensations. I had a biopsychosocial like link with it. So if I would do a certain movement, it would hurt more than others, even though the load was lower. It was all a bit of a mess. But it's one of those things where it's I can safely say, again, not to hark back to those three kind of pillars, but I use myself as a big experiment and data point for a lot of my coaching and my athletes. I know you get into individual difference, but you can. I don't recommend this to any coaches like starting out. Just as a little footnote, use yourself as like a good avatar, as it were, for trying different protocols and that kind of thing. Because
Like
you'd
a
be
guinea
surprised how
pig.
much you learn. It's what, sorry?
Like a guinea pig.
Yeah, like a guinea pig. Yeah, yeah, literally that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, no, it's fully healed now. Like my right leg's actually stronger than my left leg. It's fully stable, but the initial 18 months was a bit ropey. So, but sorry, I'm just gonna mute that. What about yours anyway? Was yours fairly straightforward or?
Oh yeah, mine was fine. Yeah, I used to
Yeah.
play lacrosse, and
Oh, decent, nice.
a goalkeeper dove through my knee, and
Ah, okay.
you hear that worrying snap. Someone
Yeah,
actually the referee came over and just said, "You've done your ACL," and I was like, "Oh, lovely."
nice, nice.
Yeah, did
It's yeah,
hamstring graft, and yeah, just get back to life, don't you? And
yeah.
hopefully,
It's a bit different. It's like the nuance with there's a big difference, sorry, between like non-contact versus trauma-based ACL ruptures. Like mine was the other side. So mine was I literally ducked under a right hook, went to pivot on my back leg, and it just popped. So
uh,
from like a neurological standpoint, a contact trauma injury of any capacity. So you'll see it with like in strongmen, for example, if you have a bicep rupture where they're playing rugby at the weekend, they reach out and someone hits their arm and it just snaps off. is usually much easier to recover from than it is midway through a movement, because your brain creates like a, that's what I said before, like that biopsychosocial link, and it's really difficult then to reverse. From a simplistic standpoint, it's just fear, but there is like this subconscious inhibition that's there. So, yeah, that's something that has to be kind of navigated depending on the nature of the injury. Um, but yeah, we talk
That's
about that all day.
well, yeah, that's very real. My
Mm.
physio explained that to me kind of a year or so ago. I got a hernia doing
Oh, okay.
heavy single leg press,
Nice.
accessory
Nice.
stuff, and yeah, got a lovely little hernia. And
Nice. Nice.
every time I go to leg press now, the
Yeah.
next 3 4 days, I'm
Mm.
I'm I'm limping, I'm
Yes.
feeling
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and yeah, he basically said you're just being a bit of a bitch.
There
Um,
is there is a point, and again, to any viewer here, like I'm not saying just throw caution to the wind and just dive straight back in, but we've seen it with Luke R, right? In the back, like now that he's starting to come back, and the approach that he had, going into, I'm really sorry, I can't remember his last comp, World Tour finals.
World Tour final.
Yeah. So like his approach going into that, there is an element of if you really wanted to go deep into it, like that biopsychosocial link actually does affect your physiology, particularly for people that are really neurological. Um, you get things like your HRV starts to play up, and then you've got like subpar coordination. It's a whole different thing to talk about, but sometimes you do just reach a point where you need to be like, crack on, get some exposure to it, and you'd be surprised at the difference that makes. I was talking to Josh Lancaster about this at Brits actually, after he like tore his bicep, because he's the extreme opposite end of the spectrum, and he was like 3 days post-op doing sandbag carries with like a cast on to try and everyone. The thing is everyone was like, he said to me, everyone was rinsing him for it, but there is some logic to it. Again, it's the extreme end, but there's some logic to getting that exposure early on. Do you know what I mean? So it's all context, same as usual.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Josh is a
Um,
bit of a mad scientist, so
well, sounds it.
yeah.
You have come to, I guess, prominence might be the right word,
Mhm.
through work with Paddy Haynes.
Yes.
Um, how have you been with him since the beginning, or is it more of a recent thing?
No, pretty much since the beginning. So he was coached by a couple of different people before I met him when he first got in. I know he was coached by Loz at the time. And Loss is like a really good mentor for him now. And that's, I think that's one of the reasons why, because they're good friends, and he's always been supportive of Pad. But I met Paddy at BNSF Brits. I can't remember the year now. I want to say it must have been at least like 2021, maybe, because like funny story with it. Whenever I compete, I am the most antisocial person in the world. Not in like a, I'm not a dick or anything, but I don't really speak to people. I just whack my headphones in, wait till my name's called, go out, do it, disappear again. And Paddy, being Paddy, was like bouncing around like I always call him like a Doberman or a big Labrador. You just let him off lead and he just runs around the gym. He came over to me and like forced me to talk to him, because I was winning. I won the under 105s that year. And we had a bit of a chat and everything. And then we all arranged to go to Finland together, in like a, group little convoy, and went to this big hotel and basically spent the whole comp and the whole holiday there together. And at that time, I think he was coaching himself or he was just doing his own thing, because Paddy's always been, obviously the work that he'd done with people previously as well had paid off, paid dividends. But he's actually quite a good coach himself. He would never say that, but he is. Um, and yeah, he just was listening to me waffle and being artistic and talking about training to a couple of the athletes, and just came to me after he won Worlds and said, "Have you got any space?" I'd already started my coaching business at the time, but I basically took him on then, and it's been since then really. So since he won, whenever he won Finland, we are in Finland, rather. So a good few years now.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that. I remember when he cleaned
Mhm.
up the natural
Mm.
scene.
Yeah,
He kind of
5 event wins.
yeah, just ran through it.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Do you think?
yeah,
I mean, obviously he was doing well then, but do you think he always had such obvious potential, or was it
yes,
a okay? Wow.
yes, 100%. I said to him, and the thing is everyone thinks I'm biased now because he's my boy, and like he's, I call him a stallion, as it were, like he's the big one in the stable. But even back then, like I literally said to him, we were playing pool in the foyer of the hotel thing, and we were talking about it, and I said, if he was to commit himself to it, he will win World's Strongest Man, the actual World's Strongest Man. And I still believe that. I believed it from day one. And this was back when, because this is the thing, obviously we could talk about his career a little bit further on, but I said this in his video in Brits, like, what people forget sometimes with Paddy is his individual performances have been almost like standard setting to some capacity. So what I mean by that is, like, you get a 200 kilo log, for example, right? For the longest time, that was, unfathomable. There was one or two people maybe that could do it, but because they could do it, everyone saw that kind of potential, and everyone's kind of risen to that level. Yeah. For the longest time with Paddy, it was that he was just the fit guy, but then to be the guy that can deadlift 1,000 pounds and then also break the shield carry world record by like 25 meters, it, again, from our previous kind of knowledge, it would be, to deadlift 1,000 pounds, you've got to be statically strong to this extent where it has a detrimental effect on everything else. Yeah. Whereas people like Paddy, yes, he does have a genetic element to it, but what he's been able to pull out of the bag in those performances showcase that the standard does kind of need to shift. Do you know what I mean? And we shouldn't kind of accept these. It's a far-fetched claim to make, but he's been doing that from day one. We shouldn't accept that to be strong, you have to be unfit. You know what I mean? And even then, that's the thing I love the most about his shield carry, for example, is there's always an asterisk next to anything he's done throughout his career. It's always been like, oh, well, it's because it's light. And then it's like, right, we put a 200 kilo shield in his hand. Oh, well, it's because of X, Y, Z. And each time he's kind of shown what he's capable of doing, and become less and less event dependent. And I think, I know it's a big leap from Weir, Finland, but seeing how well he performed in each of those individual events, it was just a matter of time of taking the potential from this event and moving it over to that one. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it reminds me of, was it Roger Bannister, the first 4 minute mile?
Yes.
It
Yeah.
was seen as impossible.
Mm.
And then he did
Exactly.
it, and then multiple people did it quite shortly afterwards because they
Exactly.
saw it as possible.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think in this sport, like, Luke R actually said it on, I can't remember what video it was. I think it might have just been a little footnote on his social media or something. But after the Europe's run, saying that Paddy's 200 kilo shield run is one of the most impressive performances in strongman, but people will never talk about it because in that top 5 kind of category, because we're obsessed with like max deadlift, max log, it's brute strength and everything like that. But again, when you see the sheer margin between performances, you've got to kind of scratch your head and think, well, like, how was that possible? You know what I mean? Like, this is the thing that makes me laugh the most with I had this debate with one of my lads in this gym.
You're going to say
The
Eddie
rogue
Hall's deadlift?
no. Credit where credit's due. Love Eddie's dead. No, but the rogue escalator in that event, right? So everyone says that's like an engine event or it was a fitness event. Yeah, Paddy won by like 30 seconds. And then the next 3 people, or rather, they don't necessarily say it's an engine event, but they will say that Paddy is the fit guy. Yeah. Right, that's pretty standard. The next 3 people after him were arguably the strongest people in that comp, not the fittest. Yeah, you're Trey Mitchell, Tom Stoll, and Tom Evans. They're not really known for being fit guys. They're very fit, don't get me wrong, but you would consider like a Rain O'Neill to be potentially more athletic, or even Mitch to some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's what I love and get a proper like passion for is with Paddy, but with my other athletes as well, is seeing when a performance individually, let alone from a competition, starts to make you scratch your head and think there's something to that. Like, what have we been able to do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yeah, I saw, going back to the original question, I saw that from Paddy from day one, literally.
He's just had it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought you were going to say, sorry to interrupt you then.
No,
Thought
no,
you were
go,
going to
go.
say, when you're talking about, by how much of a percentage Paddy broke the
Mhm.
shield record with.
Mhm.
That's what people argue about, whether Eddie's 500 was more impressive than Thor's 510,
Yes.
because Eddie broke it by a greater margin.
Yes. I think psychologically, there is an argument to be made for that, 100%. I mean, I'm one of these people that, like, I don't want to be like the guy who sits on the fence, but I don't really follow with the exception of my athletes, obviously I'm going to be biased, but I don't really follow or favour a particular athlete. I just want to see the standard of the sport or the standard of an event increase. So I
Yeah.
don't really care who has the record. I just want to see it get better. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I know some people obviously they follow particular athletes and that's fine. But for someone like Eddie to have the self belief that you're capable of breaking a record by such a large margin, no one has done that in this entire sport, in the entire sport's history, right?
Mm.
But then there's an argument to be made on Thor's side of, like he has done, of something. Take Andy Bolton for example, right? So Andy Bolton was the first man to deadlift 1,000, and I can't remember the exact number, so I'm not even going to try and attempt it. But what people don't give him credit for is the number of times he deadlifted like 900 plus pounds in competition.
Mhm.
It's something insane. It's like 40 times, and at the time it was like, there was maybe 10 people in the world that could do it. And he just turned up. I used to train with Andy actually back in when I was like 16, 17, weirdly. And he just turned up at the gym and do it. And it was like unfathomable. So when you look at like Thor, for example, for him to then continue to hit 500 like it's nothing every single time, that's its own separate achievement. You know what I mean? On top of the fact that he's redefining where that margin kind of is. You know?
Yeah, for sure. I fully agree. There's a bit of a hot topic at the moment, and I'm springing this on you here.
No, no, no.
People are talking about invites to
Mhm,
shows, you know,
mhm. Yeah,
and have people earned them? Have people not earned them? Is there favoritism? Is there this? Is it
yeah.
commerciality versus
Mhm,
athletic performance and all of that?
mhm,
If you had Paddy right now, and it
mhm.
was you've just got back from Finland, he's going to make the
Yeah.
jump into the big scary world of
Mhm,
open strongman. How would you get him through into the shows? Because if you look at a Giants Live lineup, for
mhm.
instance, Giants Live, we're British, so I would say probably half of the people invited every time, and Paddy now falls into that category.
Mhm.
They are automatic invites straight away
Yes.
because
Yeah,
they
yeah.
are obviously incredibly talented, but
Mhm.
sell tickets, sell merch, the crowd
Yes.
love them, they create a show, they
Mhm.
create that buzz and that vibe, and everyone's behind them. And yeah, and they're going to do something crazy like, all right, Paddy's going to
Mhm.
spring up and jump like a rabbit into the frame,
Yeah,
or he's going to, whatever it is, and the crowd are going to
yeah.
love it. So the spots in terms of actually qualifying for are quite hard to
Mhm.
come by.
Mhm.
If you had Paddy now at the beginning, what would you be telling him to break
Well,
through?
it's funny you should say it because that is kind of the exact approach we had anyway on the build up was so from this is going to seem like controversial or counterintuitive, but this is purely when we're looking at recognition within the sport. So this isn't to do with, it's not how I'm advising people coach athletes or how athletes approach their own thing. But when you have an athlete that comes to you, right, you have, keep it super simple, 5 events, 20% contribution to your result in each of those events, right? And you can have someone come to you, and if they have one really good event that they're really, really strong at, one really weak event, and then three that are kind of in the middle, yeah? The initial thought process might be, well, we don't want to lose too many points in the weaker event, so we need to pull that back up, okay? But dependent upon the reason that that is a weak event, the baseline that they have and how far they've got to go. And there's loads of different variables that go into it. But with Paddy, for example, his pressing, it's not a secret that it's not been his biggest strength. Okay. And we both kind of made a decision from a team standpoint, but from my standpoint, used to say to him whenever we'd go to any competition, let alone Giants, even before then, if you do one event that makes you stand out, so just one performance that makes people talk about you, then that is just as valuable as actually winning the whole comp. Because in terms of his potential at the start with his pressing, we knew he was going to lose points. We knew that was going to be something that would create a little bit of a deficit. So, he would go to comps again pre-Giants, not necessarily win. He'll come second by half a point or whatever. And everyone would sit there and say, oh, well, it's definitely his press that's caused that. Why don't we just bring that up? Right. But from a commercialization standpoint and a brand management standpoint, and he's obviously done a brilliant job with that. The point is people were still talking about him. So when you have this is the thing with the sport that people get really annoyed by, but then you kind of feeding into the problem yourself is A bit of a side note, when we have the VIP thing after the Giants comps are done, right? So we're all sat on the floor. I'm obviously sat at the side. Paddy's speaking to everyone, all the fans and whatnot. There's a weird thing where a good, I would say, 20% of those, the whole audience, look like they train, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean like they look like they actually go to the gym and then they love the sport, yeah. And then the rest of them, 80% of them, look like they're not even that interested in the gym. They just love seeing the guys. They love seeing them perform, right? So the profile of each athlete is like you just touched on then. That's what sells the tickets. So when you're looking at up and coming in the sport, and this is what I used to say to Pad, is if you can create a little bit of a buzz around yourself within just one event performance, it doesn't actually matter as much as you think where you would place, yeah, because you're building that kind of invitational like reputation that would potentially attract people. Okay, so like the funniest thing with Pad is he had his Brits performance first,
Mhm.
came 10th, right? He got that invite because everyone was talking about him on social media, and he'd done like he's a phenomenal stone lifter, and there were certain things that he was really excelling at. Yeah, his next invite was the log lift champs. Like it's the one comp that he probably doesn't, like he probably shouldn't be at. But again, he was selling tickets, and people were excited to see it, and it's just kind of built from there. So I'd probably just do a similar thing with him if I had it over again, which is, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if you know you've got something within you or you've got a certain potential within an event, it's not always a bad thing to double down on that and create a noteworthy performance. It's the only sport in the world for some reason where we only seem to glorify the person who wins, right? And well, maybe not the only sport because there's certain things in athletics, but people will still watch tennis if their favorite tennis player doesn't win every single event. Yeah, they'll still like watching Nadal because he's exciting to watch. You know, they'll still like watching a certain football team. If you're a Manchester United supporter, you got no chance at the minute. You know, everyone's crying about that. They still watch them. So if you can accept that it's part of the sport that people want to watch you, not just your performance results, it actually stands for more than you think when it comes to getting these invitations, and not overly relying on, because I love them, but Shane used to say something a while ago. You either have to have a personality, like you can't have the personality of a Weetabix and expect people to want to watch you, or you have to be an absolute freak of nature.
Mhm.
Yeah, so like Big Z, not the most colourful guy in the world, but it doesn't matter because you're Big Z. But everyone else, being able to sell yourself a little bit is the sport in a nutshell. You know what I mean?
Yeah, two things came to my mind then. Ben Francis, the owner of Gymshark, I remember
Yeah,
years ago he said, "Stop trying to be good at what you're bad at and be brilliant at what you're good at."
exactly.
And he
Yeah,
kind of, I think it was him. He said something like, the world doesn't need another mediocre brain surgeon.
exactly.
They need a wonderful
Yeah.
children's author or something.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And then you're a boxing man, right? So you do a bit of
Yeah. Yeah.
boxing. Dave Allen came to my mind. The
Mm-hmm.
Doncaster White Rhino. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of ability,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's kind of British level,
Mm-hmm.
but he can headline a stadium and
Exactly.
9,000 people turn up for him, cheer louder than anyone
Exactly.
because they love him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the thing of I think, and I've actually said this because I have a lot of like I still work in the Gen Pop, so I still have like my cult followers, I call them, like where I started with them 10 years ago, and they're into the sport because obviously I'm in it now and I coach people and whatnot. They don't give a flying, thing about what the events actually are when it comes to comps. They never ask that when I'm saying, oh, I've got, I'm at Sheffield with part of the weekend. They're not like, oh, what are the 5 events? All they care about are the other people that are competing, or if how Paddy's feeling or something. It's talking about the athletes themselves. And I know you spoke to I can't remember who you spoke to about it, about standardizing the sport, and finding
Yeah, yeah.
like whether there should be a kind of a common thread. And I do have my own opinion on that, but it's the events are kind of standardized to some degree. It was lost because he mentioned the tennis analogy,
Yes.
with different surfaces and whatnot. Um, but yeah, for the most part, the actual mainstream fan doesn't really care that much, as daft as that sounds. We all do as actual, like, you know, devout strongman fans. But the mainstream person, they just want to see, you know, Gav because he's dead exciting to watch, and they want to see Pad because he's dead exciting and all this type of stuff. So I think that's a bigger part of the sport than people realise, especially for the open weight guys. Definitely.
Yeah, fully agree with you. And actually, yeah, Loz's analogy around tennis, I think was perfect. And most
Yeah.
of the people in the comments didn't want it standardized. They liked the
Mhm.
idea of it being different. I think I'm probably somewhat biased in that regard because, like with Ben being one of my best mates, I would always be like, oh, I hope Ben's best events are in a comp, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because I want him to go on and do so well. Um,
Yeah.
I was thinking before we jumped on about like the rise for Paddy and
Mhm.
what's it been like for you as a coach? Because obviously your experiences must have changed
Mhm.
a lot, going to big comps
100%.
and stuff.
Yeah. Just mental, to be honest with you. Like, it is. We actually had this chat after Brits. Like, it was very brief, and we've not really had a period of time where we've sat back and appreciated like how far we've come as a unit, obviously. And you know, he's always going to be the main guy, and I'm not one of these coaches that's like, I always say, if you're doing it for the credit, you're doing it for the wrong reason. So I'm not going to be, you know, at the forefront and saying this is how I did everything with Paddy.
Yeah, do it
But
for the money.
yeah, of course, yeah. Credit, not credit, it's money. but, but yeah, like we've not really sat back and appreciated it. It's just been, I think, for me, from a coaching perspective, I've always been as professional as I could possibly be, in particularly in those scenarios, right? So like, this is the funny thing. I remember at, I think it was the Loglift Champs, and I turned up with Pad, and Paddy was fine, and he was doing his own thing. And then I walked into the backstage, and I had Evan Singleton here, and this is the first time I've ever met any of these guys. And then Mitch to my left, and everyone was chatting away and everything. And then I know the lads for Rebel Strength quite well. So when we were doing the warm up bit, Paddy was talking to Rob Frampton, I think at the time, and Loz, um, warming up the arm over arm, and Evan Singleton got cramp in his ab, um, and like jumped back, and there was this weird moment where I was stood with Evan's leg on my shoulder, trying to like stretch his hip out and like massage, and then he was like, I need some potassium. So then I walked off to try and find him a banana, and he was following me, and it was just like this proper mad experience where if I hadn't been with Pad and I hadn't been in my coach headspace, it'd have been potentially like this little fangirl moment of seeing all these absolute monsters, right? But because we were both kind of thrown in at the deep end with it, and Pad said the same thing, you know, when he's gone from looking up to these guys to standing toe to toe with them. It's just been a bit crazy, a bit chaotic, but I'm glad it's been that way because it's allowed us to kind of soak up the experience at every comp and not get necessarily overwhelmed with anything. You know what I mean? I feel like that's one thing that I'll take credit for us both. We responded and learned how things like the giant shows run really quickly, because we did just go with a very kind of professional mindset. So it's been very chaotic and not really stopped, but we've learned a lot along the way that's obviously fed into other comps, you know, like Rogue and all the other things. So
Yeah. Well, speaking of Rogue, and
mm.
you've done two of the big four, although this year we're big three because we haven't got Smo this
Yes,
year.
yes, yeah.
You've done two of them.
Mm-hmm.
What were they like as a coach? Are they vastly different? Did you prefer, you know, being in the sunshine of California to, well, Scotland?
Yeah, so I didn't actually go to Worlds the first time. So
Ah, no way.
I
Sorry.
don't know. No, yeah, I was going through some stuff at the time. It was all like a short notice. I had to move my gym around and all sorts of stuff. So um, I did offer him sound coaching advice on FaceTime when I was in the bath. I was just chilling, and I was chatting to him and Terry Holland when I had like candles lit and everything. So I was loving life. I was happy. But the no, I was on call as it were, at like 3 o'clock in the morning based on certain events and stuff. And
Hmm.
but in terms of the layout of the show, Rogue is. I'm trying to figure out. I don't want this to come across as like offensive in any way, but Rogue is absolutely like unbelievable. The organization is on point, like to the minute. They have a big stopwatch running, and it's just constant. And you know they've got people like holding you and wait, right, go. And it's honestly it's fascinating. The equipment backstage, everything is flawless. They've got physio tables just lined up, and it's mental. The only caveat I would say with Rogue, and I completely understand why, is it does feel like the strongman events are kind of filling the gap between the CrossFit events.
Hmm.
I've got to admit, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because again, mainstream CrossFit's incredibly popular. This year was amazing because the CrossFit athletes had a strongman like WOD, where they were doing log into yoke into power stairs, which was really cool because it got the sport in front of a lot of other people. But in terms of the organization of the comp and the way the events kind of lie, it was very long days. You're talking like 10 o'clock when the last event was on. You know, it was a big kind of slog. Whereas obviously with Worlds, I am going this year. I would imagine that. Well, no, I'd imagine you're there just for the athletes, aren't you? So it's very much like the top end pinnacle of the sport because it is just that sport. And you know, it's got the history behind it and all that type of stuff. So in terms of the logistics, I'm not necessarily sure, but the organization of Rogue, like I said, was flawless. It's just that kind of caveat with the CrossFit being there, you know.
Fair. If
But
Smo comes back, and hopefully it does,
mhm,
would you guys? I know obviously, there was the controversy last year over should Paddy been invited, should he not? And
yeah,
I've heard things from both sides, including Paddy's version, which
yeah,
when
yeah,
he said it made perfect sense. I was like, oh, that actually, that does make sense the way you phrased
yeah,
that. Um,
yeah.
would you guys accept an invite if it came back?
I would want him to,
Hmm.
um, personally, because the thing with Pad and the thing with any athlete really, but he, like I kind of said then at the start of his career, it was very much targeting specific events because it would make him stand out, right?
Hmm.
But as you mature as an athlete, you obviously, and this is the thing with him, is he's actually he's a bit of a noob when it comes to some event exposure because he's followed the Giants pathway. It's not standardized, but you've got similar kind of events.
Hmm.
So there is exposure to some events that he hasn't necessarily had yet. Um, think like you touched on before we started the podcast, like the motivation for certain events and how you deal with off season and that kind of thing. Having the urgency to train some events is sometimes the only motivating factor that people need, right? And it's easy. I'm not saying Paddy does this. It's just human nature to kind of rest on your laurels a little bit and think, well, you know, I only need to move a 420 yoke because it's the car walk and that's the heaviest they're going to go at Giants. So I don't need to get crazy strong. Yeah, but then again, you look at the standard setting performances. Tristan Holt running with what was it like 650 or 700 or something
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like if he can do that, then there's a certain element of as a professional strongman, you need to be thinking I should have at least some percentage of being able to access the same potential. And I think something like Smo would be independent of the result. I think that the experience that we would get from it as a team, but particularly from him as an athlete, of how the training cycle would work, because that's a big thing as well. The data points that you get from training for a different style of comp are invaluable because again, it's easier to kind of plug and play a formula of like, right, well, I know exactly what your work capacity and your energy system efficiency needs to be for a Giants comp, but this time we've got 3 to 4 hours between events. Now what do we do? You know what I mean? So I think I would, obviously it's Paddy's decision, it's final, but I would love to accept that invitation. And the result would almost be secondary from my standpoint. I think it would just be the most invaluable experience we could have, really.
Yeah. When you were talking about training for it, then I was for some reason my mind went to Shane Flowers, obviously coming seventh at
Mm-hmm.
Worlds, and then
Mm-hmm.
gets training for Smo.
Mm-hmm.
I remember his pec went benching in training,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
just different demands on your body for
Mm-hmm.
different comps,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
would be very interesting. And
Yeah.
I mean, who knows what Paddy's pressing could be in a
Mm-hmm.
further 13, 14 months, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
I think I know it's a little bit tangential, but I think one of the things with a lot of these elite guys, don't get me wrong, I know you have specialization. You know, me and Liz were talking about this at Brits. Like, it's funny when you look at like the Eastern Europeans, for example, as a collective. There's not many Eastern Europeans that are phenomenal deadlifters, right? Like where you would say they're turning up at the comp. You maybe got Rauno, but for the most part, you would look at them. They're incredibly explosive. They're incredibly good at pressing,
mm,
very skillful, and that's it. right? Well, I don't mean that's in a reductive sense, but whereas you go to America, you get all the barrel chested guys, phenomenal pressers, phenomenal deadlifters, not the best at moving. Yeah, so you kind of have this element of like specialization towards a certain event and whatnot. But when it comes to having the exposure, like you talked about with Shane, and I'm a big believer that the only distinction between being able to mold that athlete into what the demands of a particular comp are is just time. Which I know sounds like, well, no shit, Sherlock. But if you're planning out the trajectory of someone's career, like with Paddy now, like I'm not saying we're going to completely abandon the Giants formula, but like I said, from a data standpoint, we know what works, we know what's valuable, we know what we can eliminate, and it's like a new challenge to be able to go to these other styles of comps, and be able to figure out, well, for example, like you said, then with his pressing, I honestly believe Pad will log 180 to 200, no problem. It's just going to take a little bit longer than all of the other events. That's fine. If we can still perform building up to that point, then it just becomes a matter of longevity and consistency. You
Yeah.
know, and the same's true with look at Loz now. I know I keep mentioning him, but I watched his podcast this morning. So look at him with Mateus now. I have no doubt that if Mateus sticks to it, he'll turn Mateus into an elite deadlifter. It's just the consistency and the time. That's all. You know.
Yeah, and the willingness from the athlete, I guess,
Exactly. Exactly.
to dive in.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking then, yeah, around injuries and stuff, and um, I know there's NDAs involved with the whole Battle of the Beasts thing and stuff, but
Yes.
um, Paddy hurt his leg there, right? And then went to
Yes.
Rogue with it hurt. I was
Yes.
thinking, how resilient do you think Paddy's going to be to a big injury like that? Is it, are we drilling mindset now, or is it when it turns up one day?
Yeah. It is. It's a good question. Look, like any of these guys, you'd be foolish to suggest that they're that validation doesn't matter, right? Like, of course it does. It's why they do the sport to the most part. Of being able to walk around being the big strong guy. Yeah. The thing with Pad that's actually worked in his favor for quite a long time, and he won't mind me rinsing him for this. So I do this thing when I assess people. It's called Oxford grading, right? Which is basically, it's super simple. If you held your arm out to the side like that, I push down on your arm. You'll have had your physio do it, potentially, and you're just assessing isolated muscle strength, right? So, with someone like Pat, this is a weird point to make, but bear with me. He's not actually as strong as people think in those movements, right? I love you, Pat, but I've had people that are stronger than him in isolated capacity. Okay, and but when it comes to performance, he's obviously got high neurological efficiency. He's been able to channel what strength he does have into certain events, and he's obviously one of the strongest people in the world. But walking around day to day, I don't think he necessarily walks around like the big brute that like Brian Shaw would walk around as. Yeah. So if you take someone like Brian, for example, when he had the nerve injury to his hand, that is a head fuck for someone that is, excuse me, French, for someone that's 6'8", 6'9", 220 kilo body weight, and he can't even use nail clippers. Like, it's such a big drop from where you were day to day to then, from where you were, like I said, as the strongest person to not being able to do such a mundane task. Yeah. With Pad, and I know it's a weird kind of round the houses thing, but I think he would handle an injury a lot better than he realizes, because it would be isolated to a particular event or performance. And he's got the versatility as an athlete to then go and channel it into something else. Right. So rather than it affecting, what I'm trying to say is, rather than it affecting his ADLs from like the moment he wakes up, you know what I mean? He would be able to just switch on to something. So it would be, obviously depends on the nature of the injury, but at the time, whenever it does crop up, we'll just pivot into something else. That's what I always have in reserve anyway, of a different focus, whether it is athletic or his business or whatever it is. There's so many moving parts that you can, as a coach, at least encourage people to go off in one direction away from the injury. Does that make sense?
Yeah, send him off on a side quest.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, while he
Side
heals
quest
up.
things. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, fair, man. When you were talking then about, yeah, Paddy not being the strongest in those kind of ISO holds and stuff,
Yeah,
I was thinking of, and you're such a strength nerd from your
yeah.
university days, I'm sure
Mhm.
you'll correct me in this, but it sounded like Paddy's able to almost draw on more of his potential strength than other people.
Exactly.
I'm thinking of that thing. Wasn't there a test they did where they would electrocute you to see exactly
Yes.
how strong you could be?
Yes. Yeah. Literally that if because I get asked this question a lot, like if you were to talk about Paddy in terms of what he's capable of, like what is the genetic thing that sets him aside from other athletes, yeah, I would say his blood lactate tolerance is just remarkable. Like his ability to have sustained high intensity effort is like no one else. But then it's his relative like recruitment or his it's I forgot the actual term for it now. They do it with like isometric tests in general, but his ability to recruit the potential strength that he does have is much, much higher than most people. And yeah, it's just a case of that's why he can. He's one of the no one really talks about it for some reason, but he's one of the lightest people ever to deadlift 1,000. Like people don't really mention that,
Mhm.
and he just has this remarkable ability to do that. You know.
Yeah. How do you ensure longevity in the sport? I'm thinking, sure, to people like Matthias and others, they have a brief window of time in the spotlight,
Mm-hmm.
and then it seems to come to an end. Injuries crop up. I'm thinking of like Novikov.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
was one of my favorite strongmen. Like
Mm-hmm.
when I got into strongman for the first time. But sadly, it looks like we're not going to see him compete again for health reasons. How
Yeah.
how do you keep Paddy from being the dark horse for a couple of years and then being gone to being in the stable for 8, 10 years?
Yeah. So trying to not go off on too much of a tangent. I've already done it a few times. So from a standpoint of like any athlete, before we talk about Paddy specifically, like there's an element of like strength. If you can obviously break it down whichever which way, but if you look at it as like neurological versus myofascial, right? So myofascial is like all the tissue integrity, tendon strength, all that type of stuff. That's like the vehicle of the driver in the car, okay, and then the driver themselves is the nervous system. Um, if you take the era of the Giants, for example, like for the most part, they were incredibly resilient. Like, yes, they weren't necessarily competing as frequently and stuff like that, but for the most part, depending upon event selection and whatnot, they could do a lot and train quite heavy regularly, and not really pick up that many injuries. And when you rely heavily on your myofascial system, you aren't necessarily taking it to the red line, in a car, to use that analogy again, which means the systemic demand or the recovery demand of those events is a little bit easier as well. Okay. Flip that in reverse when you have people that don't necessarily have the best car. Yeah. If I put a Lewis Hamilton in a Nissan Micra, he could probably drive that thing into the ground a lot faster than other people, because he's able to get the most out of that vehicle. Yeah. So that's when you get the likes of Novikov, where the neurological capacity that they have is so high. And we could talk again about the physiology of that, but it, they're on borrowed time. Yeah. Then you talk about like, all the supplementation and everything like that that helps enhance that. But the point being is the number of times you go into that red line and how long you stay in there is going to be the determining factor for your longevity. Okay. Now, there's two different things with that. Like Ed Cohn used to say it a while ago, like you've got the finite number of maxes in your life. Like that is the limit. Strongman's a little bit different, obviously, because you could redline in loads of different energy systems, but you have to be selective with that. So a training philosophy that I have, and this doesn't necessarily apply to every single event, but I program Paddy and build Paddy on his 80%, not his 100%. Okay, so I'm always trying to focus on him having quite a lot in reserve, particularly in training, because if you are, it's like when we talk about peaking, right? If you're a professional strongman and you want to make a good career out of it and you want to build again the notoriety and everything like that, you're not going to be perfectly peaked for the majority of the year, right? Again, it's the only sport where we seem to think that, oh no, this one competition is the only thing that matters. If you're a tennis player and you want to play on all, I know we keep bringing up tennis, it's mad the similarities. But yeah, there's four opens. If you want to play in all four of them, you're playing year round. Like there is no off season, right? So when it comes to like progressing Pad's 80%, it's to try and make his international standard as far away from that red line as possible. Yeah. Again, this is just in training. Because if he needs to pull it out of the bag at comp, he can do. So for Pad, I'll use an example of the first time I think it was when he did 320 for 7, no, 350 for 7, sorry, at comp. Like in training, I think we pulled over 300 like twice. Yeah. When he pulled £1,000, he did a 3-week wave of pulling. I think he pulled 400, 410, 420. And before that, he didn't even pull over 350. And it was trying to get the most out of the least is probably the way I would say it from an analogy. Because it means you're not constantly going into that red line. You know what I mean? And because why would you want to in training if you want to be a professional in the sport? You know?
That's really interesting. Adam Bishop says the exact same thing pretty much. He always used to say, maxes are for the platform, not the gym.
Yeah, yeah, and this is the thing. This again, credit to Paddy. We have only ever peaked his deadlift. He'll probably correct me if I'm wrong on this. Once in our entire time working together, like actually peaked it. We peaked. Oh no, tell that. We peaked twice. We did a raw pull, but even then it wasn't still fully peaked. The Aaron Page Classic, and he pulled 400 raw.
I remember it, yeah.
Yeah, other than that, we've done one full deadlift peak. And every time he used to say, "Can I go on a deadlift bar with a suit?" And I was like, "Have you got it in comp coming up?" "No." "Well, shut up then." "No." Like you can save it. So it was funny when he pulled £1,000, it was something like a 70 kilogram PB because he'd waited for so long to be able to do it, you know? And I'm not saying don't have fun or anything like that. Of course, like it's rich for me to say that when I go off plan every 5 minutes of my own training. But what I'm saying is that these top guys, the demands from an absolute basis, which is the other kind of side to that coin, are so high that you do want to box clever with different training methodologies that allow you to get the most out of the least, you know. And Tom Hibbert is whether he even knows it or not, is a mentor of mine. Like he talks a lot about structural balance and that kind of thing, and all these ratios and percentages. And some people like poo-poo it and say it's not important, but the point is it's just giving guidance to the aspects of training that people normally neglect just because they're not as sexy as the others. Yeah, but if you can reduce that absolute strength or systemic demand by doing a good morning that only needs to be like 70% of whatever your deadlift is, then you don't have to go in the gym and sling 400 every week to be able to get to that level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And yeah, Tom Hibbert is, yes, celebrated for that kind of
Yeah.
training and yeah, utilizing different systems from Norwegian to conjugate to, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
to pivot slightly, I was thinking
Mm-hmm.
around weight class athletes, and you're
Mm-hmm.
heavily involved in that weight class scene with athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think that level of the sport is at right now?
Mm. In terms of like the athlete standard, or in terms of the organization, or both? Or?
A little bit of both, because
Mm-hmm.
I have to be honest, when I think about weight classes, and I'm not super educated in it, I often tend to think of the ones who leave the weight classes and go into opens.
Yes. Yeah.
I think about, okay, Cal Crozier,
Yeah.
crazy weight class athlete that
Mm-hmm.
really, really wants to push it into the opens.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to see participation numbers in weight classes continue to grow? Are we going to see people, because are there opportunities for them?
Yeah.
I hear weight class people, and I'm not standing on a soapbox here, but I regularly hear weight class people say on
Mm-hmm.
social media that it's a joke that they're not paid. And I have to say, I firmly disagree because you're only paid versus what you bring in. And
Yes.
if there's
100%.
no spectators, you can't
No.
expect to be paid. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a hobby. Like when I played lacrosse,
Yeah.
I didn't expect anyone to pay my travel. It was amateur
Yeah.
sport.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? Where do you see like the future of weight classes?
Yeah. So I completely agree. For one, I don't think that weight class athletes should be paid. That's very controversial with me, but as a coach, but I just don't think they should for the exact same reason that you just said there. I think the it's interesting because I think the growth of the sport on a weight class level comes from the thing that we're arguing shouldn't be used in the open weights. Okay, so one of them being like standardization. I think it should be more standardized, which it is to some degree. Like OSG tends to follow a similar formula, that kind of thing. Because I think the growth of the weight class sport is going to come more from participation and getting those numbers to grow than it is from attracting a large crowd. You go to OSG, there's hardly anyone watching it, but there's hundreds of people in the room because there's hundreds of athletes, and they all support each other. And we can, I don't want to sit here and say that we all fall out or anything like that, but there's also a little bit more like possibly, I don't know whether it is frustration because the sport doesn't grow or anything, but there needs to be more nurturing the athlete experience from a weight class standpoint, and not necessarily worrying too much about, like I said, the crowd. Whereas like that's the exact inverse for the opens. I think seeing the personalities within the sport does help. So like with Tommy Lavelle and what the under 80s lads did with the nature walk is brilliant. But again, I think that is almost second to, at least from them and watching them, it's not so much about their performances in the sport. You know what I mean? Because we're all strongman by its nature is. I'm sorry to say it's meritocratic. So like the strongest people are the ones that tend to attract within reason anyway, tend to attract the largest crowds. A 400 kilo deadlift is always going to be more impressive than 300. Like that's it's not to say that isn't impressive. It's just more people are drawn to this, aren't they? So I think this the weight class like standard, particularly from an athletic standpoint, is higher than it's ever been. I think the participation within the sport is growing, particularly with the rise of like natural strongman and whatnot, because it's becoming more relatable for people to participate in. So it's this weird dichotomy because it's like, do you want the sport like the open weight scene is by its very nature exclusive and almost esoteric. Yeah, you go to watch these guys because you're never going to be those guys. You're not going to be like 6'6" and throwing massive boulders of cars and all that crap like the layman sees. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I think creating a little bit more relatability and accessibility within the weight class side of the sport, it potentially comes at the detriment of this exclusive feel, which is what like I loved the some of the larger comps that the weight class guys did, like even like PSL for example, like that's a little bit more exclusive. It's great, but it also limits then the accessibility from other athletes of a similar kind of skill set or weight class or anything. You know what I mean? So I think it might sound counterintuitive. I don't know how it works from like a qualification pathway or anything like that yet, because you don't want it to be too saturated. But I do think the growth and the trajectory of that side of the sport comes from participation over spectators. Absolutely.
Interesting. MST Shane said he sees weight classes as not the future of opens, but the things that they do to refine techniques there. And actually, Paddy split jerked the barbells at
Yeah.
Britain's.
Yeah.
And Shane was kind of crediting split jerking in opens
Mm-hmm.
from weight class athletes because they can't put on size, really, they can't put
Mm-hmm.
on weight. So they have to fully maximize every little thing. So that's
Mm-hmm.
where split jerks start coming in
Mm-hmm.
because they can't get big enough to push press it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that's accurate, or is that just kind of a one-off thing?
I honestly I couldn't agree more. So that what I said then is more from like the sport as an entity, like
Yep.
separately. So when you talk about like the growth of it as an organization, almost like the growth of Natty Strongman, for example, from what the weight class athletes are capable of, I have like probably my other big stallion in my stable from a weight class side of things is Emmanuel Pascari, right? So I'm very fortunate to be able to coach him. I believe he is one of the strongest humans I have ever met. And like even on an absolute scale, like he's log pressing 190, he's just an absolute freak of nature. But his efficiency and what he's capable of is something that would rival the opens, yeah, and what they can learn from. And then it does trickle down, where you can't just rely on absolute strength. The Paddy split jerk, Chloe Brennan taught him that. I didn't. I programmed it, but credit where credit's due. Chloe fixed and sorted everything for his overhead with that. So there's a massive amount of strength again when you go back to like the myofascial versus the neural that the weight class guys and girls are much better at, and that absolutely should be tapped into. I think they're better at it. I just think from a standpoint of when you look at them as, like I said, two separate organizations, the mainstream are always going to attract this side of it because if I turn around to, Margaret in the gym who occasionally watches it at the Christmas, and she's the one that might potentially pay for a ticket, and I say, oh, well, do you know about the, unilateral strength deficit with split jerk? She don't give a shit, does she? She just cares about the way that people look, how that big man looks when he lifts a boulder. So I think from an athlete perspective and a coach perspective, the weight class is actually more exciting to some degree. Because you get all these other variables that you don't necessarily get with the opens. I just think the growth of the sport, they need to go in two different directions, personally.
Yeah, I see a lot of merit to that, and I think for some reason my mind went to a place where I was thinking about. Have you ever heard people talk about, a good strongman event or strongwoman
Mm-hmm.
event? You should have, say, you've got 12 people competing. You should have four people that can do it,
Mm-hmm.
four people that can like almost do it but won't
Yeah.
quite finish, and then
Mm-hmm.
four that can barely do it. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, I wonder if that will transition into weight classes because we do still have weight class competitions at
Mm-hmm.
high level, like high
Mm-hmm.
kind of British level, and people are zeroing things.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think maybe, yeah, participation increasing will obviously increase the talent pool,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Yeah.
will raise the standard and the level across the board.
Mm-hmm.
John, this has genuinely been such a pleasure. I want to end with something new. We've never tried this
Mm-hmm.
before, okay? And I did prep you a little bit before we got recording. I
Yes.
normally ask the guys to pick someone for a deadlift, someone for an overhead to build their like fantasy strongman, right?
Okay.
But you're a coach and you look at athletes and you look at prepping people for different competitions and what we need for this one versus this one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My challenge for you, and I think people will love to hear it, is I want you to design a competition, a 1 day competition with 6 events,
Okay.
which would crown the most well rounded strongman. And because for me, I think that is what I would call world's strongest man,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that having an element of that well rounded. We want some big lifts, but we also want some, speed, fleet of foot.
Mm-hmm.
We want someone who can do it all. Um,
Mm-hmm.
6 events. I've got some written down myself just because I was like, I wonder, to
Yeah. Yeah.
standardize.
Okay.
But where would your head be at if you were organizing it?
Okay. I think so. When you talk about like standardizing the sport, that there's an element of a common thread across the sport, isn't there? There's usually an overhead, a posterior chain based movement, something that's triple extension based, and a moving event, and then like a skill based or something that's constrained by skill. I think for me, I would go 2 overheads, um, 2 moving events, and then 2 heavy like posterior chain based. Like that would be my initial criteria.
Lovely.
Um, I think again, this is just me personally. I think we don't see enough really heavy moving events. That's just my own personal preference. I think when you go really deep, which I won't do because we'll take up too much time, into like gait mechanics, it's almost a completely different movement when you walk with something heavy versus when you run with it. It would be I would liken it almost to like a squat versus a deadlift. They look the same, but they're really, really not. So I think it tests something subtly like there's just a sort of enough difference that, at least from my nerdy perspective, I'd get excited by that. So I would say a heavy, heavy yoke, like really heavy.
Trift and
Um,
Hoth heavy.
yeah, either. In fact, no, tell right. So I'd go heavy yoke into farmers or into
Oh,
frame, so that you've got a grip element in there. So it wouldn't be Tristan Holt heavy, but almost like when they did. I can't remember the worlds when they did. Oh, they did not last year, year before, was it? That was yoke into frame, wasn't it?
yeah,
The
yeah,
one where Mitch threw his hands up, and yeah, so
yeah.
something like that. Maybe make the yoke a little bit heavier. So that would be my first one. I'd have a loaded medley. Um, that tests a little bit more of like the conditioning element and speed of most moving events. I would have that to the extent where the speed isn't the delineating factor. And what I mean by that is it's not a drag race between all 10 competitors.
Mhm.
It's kind of like you touched on a minute ago. Some athletes aren't even finishing it. That level of like, I'd have like 4 or 5 implements in there, and you're getting split times based on which implement you get to. You know what I mean? Um, I love overhead medleys. I don't know why. I think it's one of the best ways to test an overhead.
Yep.
So possibly something like the year they did axle, dumbbell, double dumbbell, and log. I think they did at Worlds. Might
Oh,
have
was
been.
that the year Janasha tore his tricep?
It was, yeah. And I think they did double dumbbell that year because I think that was when Mateus just vipered everything. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
I had a
But
personal gripe with that. Bish
yeah,
went first in that. He went first,
yeah.
and they were told they had to do them in a certain order.
Ah, yes,
So
yeah,
Bish did them in order, and then they let
yeah.
everyone else do them in a different
Just love
order.
everyone. No,
So
I've seen it.
so they went for the heaviest stuff first, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm like, come
I've
on.
seen it. Yeah. I would
But
have
yeah, love that.
yeah. So yes, what I forgot? Yokin's Farmers, loaded medley, overhead medley. Um, then I would have an overhead for max, with whichever implement isn't in that kind of wheelhouse. So like I'm probably a bigger fan of log for max than I am including it in a medley or for reps, to be honest with you. I just think I personally prefer axle for max, but I think it's the technical constraint throws people off a little bit more than potentially it would be if we're just testing brute strength.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'd go for something like that. Then deadlift, um, a deadlift for reps. I'm a bigger fan of a deadlift for reps actually than I am for max. So there would be that, and then
Are you
a
thinking like stiff bar, axle, raised
ooh,
height?
not raised height because I do think the higher it goes, the more of a gimmick it is. To be honest with you, that's just my. I think silver dollar should be banned if we're talking about changing the sport, particularly at the lower levels. Just get rid of silver dollar because it's pointless. Yes, I'd probably go just deadlift bar for reps actually because it's
Nice.
not that common. It's usually maybe it's just because I've been around giant shows. It's usually axle for reps or that kind of thing. So deadlift suit, deadlift for reps, and then heavy stones for me. Like I'm talking world's ultimate. Do you remember the world's ultimate strongman in Dubai?
Yes,
Back
yeah,
in the day, they had a 10 stone Atlas run. I loved that. Loved it. It was
yeah.
it was just it went on for ages, but it ended heavy as well. It ended at like 220. It was a
What
big
Worlds
run.
did one, didn't they? That was long. It was when again talking about Bish. Bish was up against
Mm,
Shivlikov,
mm,
and Shivlikov got injured. But I don't think it was 10
yes.
stones.
No. I think
Um,
it was.
COVID times. It might have been like 6 or 7 or something.
Yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
know they did they did the last man standing stone, didn't they? I don't know whether that's the same year, but
no, different
they've
year. That
done
was
that
when
where it was like
Trey put Bish
back
out.
and forth, and then it was they got to the final stone, and then they rep that stone. After
Yeah.
that, I preferred that. In fact, man, yeah, maybe let's throw that in. I don't know how it would work logistically, but I loved the last man standing stone. Everyone slagged it off, but so yeah, that's my yoke into farmers, loading medley, overhead medley, log for max, deadlift for reps, and stones.
I love that.
That's my
I
that's my
I only slag off the stone for reps last man standing just because I saw Trey Mitchell take Bish out on it.
yeah, yeah,
And Trey only got put into Bish's group the night before, and we were like,
yes.
no.
I don't like it for I mean I don't know in what other scenario it would apply, but I don't like it for deciding things like the group qualification. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Especially when I think it was it the Trey versus Novikov year where
Oh,
Novikov was like 10 points clear or something ridiculous,
yeah,
and then he beat him in that. I think you should only get like 5 points if you win, 4 points if you don't, that kind of thing.
I get
And
it.
if it creates the if it gets you over the deficit, great. If it doesn't, you've still won the event, but not necessarily qualified.
Yeah, I get
So,
you. I get
yeah,
you. John, this has been an absolute pleasure.
it has,
Paddy's
man. Thank
right.
you
You
very much.
are a savant of the sport.
Thank you, pal. Thank
And
you
yeah, the
for
time has
indulging
flown
me.
by.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you for indulging me, mate.
oh, it's been a real pleasure, mate. Been a real pleasure. And I think people are going to have loved it. Thank you to everyone who stuck to the end.
Mhm.
It's been a pleasure. Cheers,
Yeah,
mate.
it has, man. Take care.